Good afternoon, Daniel.
Good afternoon, Dan. How are you?
Yeah, doing all right. I see that you are titled here in our chat as a future CFP. Are you getting ready for your exam?
I am, and I'm also starting to manifest the reality. So I'm envisioning myself passing. I'm putting it, in writing it into the universe that I'm a future CFP, and doing my best to make sure everything goes well in July here.
All right. Well, fingers crossed and best of luck with it. Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. So, what are we talking about this week?
I don't know. I actually didn't prepare anything. I forgot we were even doing this. So you tell me.
Truth of the matter being, I don't think you forgot. I think it's my responsibility this week because we're talking about your time here at my Wealth Planners.
Why are you letting me go?
I don't know if you remember this, but we had breakfast back in October, and you told me a whole 9 months in advance that you were going to be going on your way.
Sure. All right. Well, so that sounds like that's what we're talking about today, then. Just my experience and what's been going on for the last 2 years.
Yeah, more or less. So I guess let's just start it off with maybe a little bit of background. I know most of our listeners have listened since the beginning and have followed the story thus far and know you and whatnot. But maybe just recap for us. Before you joined My Wealth Planners, what were you doing? What were you looking for? What ultimately drew you here?
Yeah. So it's funny, that was 2 years ago we had this conversation. It feels like a longer time than that. But, yeah, so I came out here 2 years ago. I guess before that, I had went to St. Joseph's University, which is a small college out in Philadelphia. I had done what's called a co-op program, which is essentially, a program that allows you to essentially gain working experience while being a full-time student. You kinda take your classes in the summer so that during the actual semesters, you can just work full-time. And I got a pretty early head start, kinda thanks to COVID, during a time when a lot of people maybe were really stressed and had nothing to do. I had a lot to do because I was kinda learning what financial planning was and what this industry had and entailed. So I started my career as a freshman in college, and I didn't actually realize it until somebody asked me recently. I worked 7 of the 8 semesters I was in college pretty much full time. So I essentially, from my second semester freshman year until I graduated, and then a year after I'd graduated, worked for a financial planning firm based in the Philadelphia area. And, sometime toward maybe a month or so after graduation, I'd kind of come to grips with the fact that I think my time was up there. The firm had gotten a little bit maybe more sales oriented than I think I was comfortable with. And while I had objectively at this point in time 3+ years of full hands on experience, I recognized that maybe if I kept going with my current course of action, it would lead me to a different career and a different set of skills than maybe what I wanted. So I decided to say, okay, well, you know, blank slate, right? We just graduated college. Where do we want to go? What do we want to do? And I really started to prioritize what I considered to be great learning opportunities to excel and build the skills necessary to become a really good planner. That was kind of my North Star in terms of opportunities. I wasn't really looking for the highest paying job or something even really, in the vicinity of where I grew up in New Jersey, just given the set of circumstances I had at the time. So I opened up my search to, the 48 states and said, okay, well, if I find a great opportunity that you think is going to sort of allow me to gain those critical skills and the critical experience to propel a career forward for the remainder of my life. Let's go do that. And that led me here about 2 years ago, and been doing that ever since.
It's funny because I remember my perspective on it when you first applied and interviewed and all that. I think you're the only candidate that I've ever reached out to in advance to be like, you do realize you're applying to an entry level position here because you already had three, almost, I think at that time, almost 4 years of experience with your investment license. And clearly you'd been in the business for a while. That overlapped college. I didn't really know at the time, but you'd been in the business for a healthy amount of time and you were at the moment of your career where we often say that demand for financial planners really explodes at the 3 to 5 years of experience mark. And you were at the phase where you could write your own ticket to go just about anywhere that you wanted. So maybe what was missing or absent in your previous experience that made you say, I want to go somewhere else. I want to learn somewhere else. I want to do something different than what I've been doing. Because you also had already made it past the survival curve as an advisor. So again, you really had every choice available to you. So what was maybe lacking or different where you were versus what drew you to us?
think the you said like the 3 to 5 years is where you kinda, the opportunities find you as opposed to maybe you finding them, and I think that's also sort of in a way, at least on the shorter end, I'd say maybe 2 to 3 years is kind of how long it at least took me while also being a student, and doing all the college things. So I'm easily distracted by everything else going on in college. That's how long it kind of took me to reflect on like the industry as a whole and sort of where I fit into it. I'm not discerning enough as a freshman in college to say, well, this job is, 60% of what I want as opposed to 100% I want. I was just trying to figure it all out to begin with. And I think sometime toward the end of my time in college, I sort of realized where I fit into the industry. I realized, certain companies sold products, certain companies didn't sell anything besides their advice. Some companies did a mixture of both. And my girlfriend's in medical school, so I find myself using a lot of like medical analogies as of late. So I think the best way to describe it is like I kind of sort of realized that the way I was being trained was almost like is if a instead of a doctor going to residency and learning how to do the job, we instead said, okay, you're going to become a doctor or you are a doctor now, but you haven't actually worked with any patients. We'd like you to go find patients. And you'll get the experience by finding the patients and then treating them once you actually have them as patients, which seems a little counterintuitive given the fact that they haven't actually worked with anybody yet, so they might not exactly know what they're doing, and telling them to learn by first finding the person and then figuring it out as you go was kind of like what I saw my career doing a little bit. I'd built up enough clients at this point where I had started to work with people, and I was lucky enough that, by asking, they let me sit in on other advisors' meetings, so I was able to build their repetition that way, but it still didn't feel like enough to me, and it felt like the a certain level of depth for financial plans wasn't rewarded because of the extra time and effort and research it took to develop that part of the model or the plan that maybe didn't compensate us directly. And I think those two things led me to say, okay, well, I have my whole career to kind of maximize compensation per se. And I think in my 20s, I'm probably better off maximizing experience and maximizing skills to then in my later stages of career leverage compensation. So I didn't feel I was getting the education in a formal sense in the way I desired it at my last firm, which sort of led me to, my North Star of just education and experience and skill building in my next opportunity.
Hopefully, we've provided that, and maybe we'll talk about that here in a couple minutes. But we're having this conversation. We're talking about all this because you're now making the move back to New Jersey. So, what's taking you home? What's drawing you away from us?
Sure. Yeah, the things you do for love, So my girlfriend and me had been together for like 6 years at this point now. And we always kind of said, like, look, if the long distance thing ever becomes a little too difficult, we will make the changes we have to. And so, I think toward the end of last year, we kind of came together and realized that renewing my lease in a couple weeks here when it expires or ends probably wasn't the best thing for our relationship if that was truly the most important thing to each of us, and it was. So we kind of said, okay, look, well, as much as I love working here and I love the area, there's some things that are more important to me, and our life together being one of them. So really, just as she supported me in coming out here and sort of, trying to build my career and do some good in the meantime, I want to help her as she goes through the remainder of her time in medical school and support her in her dreams and becoming a doctor as well. And I think it's kind of my time to now move back home and help her in doing that. So.
As you say, the things we do for love. And I have to call out or say here, you gave us, as I implied earlier, you gave us not just 2 weeks notice, but you gave us literally more than 9 months notice. I think almost 10 months at this point. In our industry, it's very normal to give your 2 weeks and immediately get walked out of the office and be told, thanks for your service, get out of here. I feel like you took a risk there. So, what about you or what about my wealth planners made you decide that taking that risk was worth it?
I think it's twofold. Like, I think part of it is me, and I think part of it's probably you, right? So I'll start with myself, just because I could probably more accurately explain my own intentions and stuff. I'm a really bad liar. I think and most people that know me would probably describe me that way. So like for me, if me and Olivia, my girlfriend, made this decision back in October, I think it would have just been very difficult for me to come in every single day, give it my all, and really make sure I was leaving everything on the table and doing everything, knowing I was, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So on a personal professional level, I just couldn't stand doing that. Like even at my last firm, I knew I was leaving a couple months before I actually left, and I I really hated it. Like, and that was 1099, so I can kind of get away with it a little bit more because there was nobody really telling me what to do every single day. And even then, it just really drained me, and it didn't make me feel good. So I think, you know, just just for myself, like I had to because I think I would have lost my mind if I had to work here for 9 months, like knowing full well that for 8.5 months I have to put up a face until I, give my 2 weeks sort of thing. And then on the other side, like, I think there's a lot of things we probably do here. One example just that comes to mind being like, we all know how much we make. It's fairly public. There's a table. You can read the table and kind of chart out where we all are on the spectrum of, compensation. Like that's a pretty unnormal thing, I'd say, right? There's a couple other things we probably do like that. And I think like doing what I did is probably something that probably we would honestly, if a client came to us and said they were going to do that, we would probably advise the majority of them not to because of what you just said, right? You get your 2 weeks and there you go. But I kind of said, look, like I personally wouldn't like to do it. On the other side, you've always made it pretty clear through your words and actions like, hey, look, I just want the best for you regardless of if that's here or somewhere else, and if I have the opportunity to help you, if the reality is you're not going to be here forever, I would like to do that, right? I think we recognize that it's more than just the job is good, I stay, the job is bad, I leave. There are outside circumstances and factors, example being me moving home for, my future with my partner here. Like there's outside things that kind of influence, your ability to stay somewhere. So it's not all about the job, and I think you said pretty clearly like, hey, look, if that ever becomes your reality, like I'd like to help, and I wanted to leave the firm in a good place. And I think the more time and opportunity I was able to give the practice to put us in a good place, so that when I left, there weren't that many hiccups. Like that meant a lot to me, and I know it was a risk and probably one I wouldn't advise most people to take depending on where they work. But I'd say I was fairly comfortable saying that. Like, all right, there's obviously a chance he lets me go. And I think I said that to you. I was like, hey, yeah, if you let me go, like, I get it. It makes sense from a numbers standpoint. But I was still confident just doing it because I knew I'd land on my 2 feet. And if I had to figure something out for a couple months before my lease ended, I would. And I wouldn't have been, I don't think, super, I don't think I would have held it against you too much. It's business.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that you took the chance and took the risk because it's obviously put us in a really good place to readjust the firm and make shifts and changes to how we're doing things over all this time since we had that conversation. It's wild now where we're now at the time that this will publish, you will be gone by the end of this week. And that blows my mind because I feel like that conversation, we went and got breakfast at Tangerine, and that's where this initial conversation happened. And that still feels like it was yesterday. Like time has just flown by despite how much has happened since then. But again, I have to say it's a positive mark on your character. I think everybody likes to know that somebody's a bad liar, but it's a different thing to come out there and say it. But I think it's also just a comment on your character. I've spent the last 2 years fielding quite a few compliments about you, and I kind of joke in response when people say like, "Oh, Daniel's great," or Daniel's such a great young man, or such a professional, or whatever it is. I like to say they really built Daniel in the school of nice young men. It's just something where you've always been a very professional, very direct, very conscientious, very responsible individual, and I think that shows on your end more so than mine. Like I can say I'm grateful that you took me seriously and believed me when I said, because it could have been a trap, right? I could have been like, oh, of course I want to help people. And then you tell me something and I'm like, you're fired. So I appreciate that you took me at my word when I've always said, like, I do want the best for people who work here. I do want them to do well in life. And if they can do that here, that's great. And if they need to do it somewhere else, I understand. And I want to support them in that journey. But really, it truly has meant the world to me personally, let alone to the needs of the firm and the needs of our clients and so on, that you were willing to communicate that so well in advance. So anyway, with that in mind, you've now been here for 2 years. You came from a different firm. How has your perspective on financial planning changed over time? What has been the difference working in one environment, now working in this environment? What has your perspective been, and where has it come from, and where has it gone?
Yeah, like I think there's a couple things. First and foremost, like I came into an established practice here. We like to help people. We want to help more people, right? Which is why we're also scaling and growing at My Wealth Planners. But like you always made it pretty clear, like if we thought somebody was disrespectful or not a great fit for whatever reason, like we don't actually need more families to work with in order to like survive and keep payroll running and keep the lights on sort of thing. So like, it's not a fully accurate statement when I say like because we are still growing, but it's interesting like at my last firm I started with no clients. So I was always growing, and you needed more clients and you spent the majority of your time attracting new clients and trying to speak with them. But here, we already have an established client base. So we have a lot of folks we already work with. And I think one of the things that's been interesting to reflect on is how different it is growing a financial planning practice or business versus maintaining and nurturing a financial planning practice and set of clients. And it doesn't take a different set of skills, but it shifts the roles and responsibilities and like day to day considerably, right? Where at my last firm, like I probably spent, I don't know, 70+% of my time during a week doing things to bring on new potential clients. And I wouldn't say that's the case here. Maybe there's things that will eventually, have direct results, right? But we're not going to things like the chamber events to drive new business directly. It's more of just a relationship building exercise and our way of giving back to the community. So we I think we spend considerably less time doing sort of active marketing, in a traditional sense. And that leaves a lot more time to go really deep with your clients, not just on a financial level from like a numbers standpoint, but really understanding some of the motives and drivers behind some of their actions and decision making. And I think it's been interesting working in and over time appreciating the shift from growing to just sort of nurturing and maintaining, because it takes a different set of skills once you have the client and they deeply trust you, right? But you still want to make sure you're being valuable and holding space for the conversations if and when they need them. And that's totally different day to day and week to week than growing a practice from scratch.
Yeah, I'll say I've experienced that personally where my first 2 or 3 years as a planner, I was very much in a similar situation as you were working at your prior firm where it was, hey, you need to go get clients, you need to go do business development, et cetera. Today, essentially 100% of our business or our new client relationships come from either just search engine optimization. Yeah, we score very well here in Longmont. And then otherwise, literally client referrals is the next largest source. Professional referrals from CPAs, attorneys is our third largest source. And then every once in a rare while, we'll be volunteering somewhere, we'll be part of a board or something, and a fellow member of that board or somebody at that event we're volunteering at will be like, hey, Daniel, do you know anything about this tax stuff? And sure, we can talk about that. Like it, I've been doing this now long enough that I'm still caught off guard when somebody says, like, "Oh, hey, can you help me with this?" And you're like, "But yeah, I sure can. Thanks for asking." Yeah, but the vast majority of our clients just come from referrals from existing relationships and people finding us on their own. And I think that's been a comfort. I think it's been nice not to be a firm that has to knock on doors or cold call or buy lists or host like steak dinner seminars or something like that, where we've just built enough of a brand and a reputation in our community to be sought out. And that really has been a privilege in growing the firm, but also it's something that I think creates a lot of comfort in the type of kind of learning and nurturing environment that we're able to build here.
Totally. And I think another point, going from where I was to where I am, it's interesting because we had a lot of clients that, and I've told stories like this before, maybe not on the podcast, but we had some clients that, like, I'm sitting in a meeting as a senior in college, and it's a big enough client from a financial standpoint that they're bringing in like the heavy hitters. They're bringing in like my senior manager and stuff, and I'm watching them continuously try to shove a round peg in a square hole where the client clearly doesn't want the product where they're trying to sell. And I think it gave me a sense of almost like imposter syndrome, right? Where you almost feel like a fraud in the work you're doing, because I started to realize like, okay, these are, clients worth multi millions of dollars. And like, while I am technically working with them, I don't feel like we're actually doing the thing they want. We might sell them something and they might be pleased and to get some ancillary planning after the fact, but it didn't make me feel great about how to actually work with somebody like that long term, as opposed to making a transactional, being compensated on a commission from a transaction and implementing something. I wanted to be compensated on my advice and be able to confidently tell someone I'm charging, 4 or 5 figures a year to just provide you the advice and obviously the implementation and monitoring of the advice as well. And I think, I had a deep amount of imposter syndrome and almost starting to feel like this persistent self doubt because maybe I had advised somebody on something in the past and objectively know more than almost anybody in regard to finances by just doing maybe taking my 65 and my CFP curriculum. But I don't think that made me feel necessarily better about the fact that I'm giving advice on something I feel, I barely learned myself. And I think a part of that is probably because I was new in the industry. And I think it's also part of the fact that I started working as a licensed individual when I was 19 years old. So it's like I think the two go hand in hand. But now like I'm still fairly young. I'm only 25, and I don't really, if ever, feel that anymore, which is interesting because I go to a conference here and there or do something with people from the FPA who are of my age and title, and that seems to be a pretty consistent theme continuing to come up. Is this I'm giving advice to somebody 2 or 3 times my age, and it's it feels weird, and it does to a certain extent depending on the personality fit and who the client is. But I think for the most part, for me on a professional level, like I don't think I've felt that in 2026 at a minimum. And I look back to 2025, and it's probably a while before I that feeling came up too. And I think that's been cool because it's not a feeling I necessarily miss. And I know and recognize that it'll continue to persist throughout my career as I hopefully continue to do bigger and better things. And that's just part of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. But like the initial phase of it where I just like feel confident or don't in just advising people on their finances is pretty much vanished, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I think you suddenly reach a point where your age is much less relevant when you realize, oh, yeah, I'm 25, but I have 6 years of experience advising people and managing money, which means I have 6 years more experience than just about everybody that I talk to, right? And that's not nothing. You haven't had certain life experiences like getting married or having children yet, but you have spent this much time having these professional conversations, building professional trust with people, and getting the opportunity to do that. And I think it's frankly just impressive, right? Because I started my career as a financial planner when I was 25, on my 25th birthday, in fact. From that standpoint, you have 6 years more experience than I did when I was getting started. So I think it's just something powerful behind you as somebody who got started so early. But maybe we'll say enough with the comparisons and maybe just talk about a little bit more about your experience. What have you enjoyed most about working here? Whether that's the work or the team or the environment or just being here in Colorado, what have you enjoyed the most?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I don't want to distill it down to one point. So I'll just go sort of in order that I'm thinking about them in my head, which isn't the order of like preference, I guess. But I think one is when I grew up, when I was growing up, I was a big like why kid, the kids kind of, oh, why? And I used to pester my dad with those questions a lot. Like he'd be like, "Oh, dad, why is the sky blue?" or this or that. And my dad's a pretty smart guy, and he's one of these guys that like has like weird knowledge where he just like knows a lot about a lot of things. So he usually actually had an answer to most things, which I always thought was like pretty sweet because I'm a naturally curious person. So I just like asking a lot of questions, right? Even if it's something that has no significance or bearing on my life whatsoever, right? Like I want to know why the trees explode when the weather gets cold and gets hot again. And my dad, for some reason, knows about the veins in the trees and how that kind of stuff works, which yeah, I find fun. So on like a professional level, I think I've gotten that here a little bit, right? Because there's a lot of like weird stuff that comes up in personal finance that I just enjoy asking the team about, and for the most part, I feel like I'm able to get an answer, and on it is satisfying every once in a while when I get like I ask you something and it's like, I actually like don't know the answer to that. Not because you're an idiot or anything, but because it's such a niche little thing that comes up once every decade that why would you know that? But it almost challenges me to sort of think of things on a deeper level because because of the fact that these you really you have to internalize something to really think about it at a level where those weird niche questions come up. And I think it's challenged me on a professional level to do that because I want to understand the things fully before I'm gonna recommend or even just like think I understand the thing. I think also I've mentioned this one a ton, at least outside of the podcast, but like I wouldn't really have, and maybe still to this day wouldn't really consider myself like a patient dude, but definitely back in New Jersey, like it's a pretty fast-paced culture. It's the most densely populated state in the United States. It's right next to the city, so it's a lot of like fast-paced, moving, high energy, a lot of people in a small amount of space sort of area. And I think that naturally leads people to kind of just move very quickly, a lot of urgency, little patience. And, for the most part, people just work a lot, right? Like it's not uncommon for people to just brag about the fact that they work 70, 80 plus hours a week and, sort of wear it as a badge of honor almost. And we talk about this a lot, but, I think becoming a better person can lead you to becoming a better planner. And that's not mutually exclusive to the industry, but I think it is an industry where that's true. And I think moving out here made me a better person because I became a lot more patient. The culture is a little slower. People have interests outside of work, and they realize there's more to life than the thing they do, to make money. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it, but for some people, they recognize there's a lot more than that. And I think it made me a better advisor because it allowed me to be more patient and implement and discuss with clients that perspective, which I don't think I had before, right? So kind of like what you said earlier, I haven't gotten married, I haven't had kids that I know of, and because of that, I haven't had certain life experiences that clients could have. So while I might not be able to directly empathize with it, a way around that per se is to have life experiences that mimic those things because you have the same feelings, right? So when somebody has a child, right, it's a new thing for them. They haven't experienced before. So there's a lot of uncertainty and angst and unknown. And while I have not had a kid, right, I moved to Colorado without knowing anybody. So I shared those feelings myself so I can reflect on those experiences and hopefully, give some thought into a conversation with a client who might be having an experience I haven't because I've had similar feelings through doing things myself. And I think continuing to do those things is valuable because it allows you to continue to share those feelings with clients from the experiences they have. And on a professional level, like I said, right, it's been great just to be able to build that experience from moving to a new area. And I think, lastly, I think those are two things. I'd say another big one is just like we're an in person firm, so we do a lot of stuff outside of the office in the community as well. And I don't know who it was with because it was probably 2 years ago at this point. But like, I'm trying to think of the first person not affiliated with the firm that I had coffee with. And I don't remember who it was, and that's apologies if they're listening. But I remember how it made me feel. I hadn't had coffee with people before. I'm like, what the heck do I even talk about? This is, this is un this is an unknown, uncharted territory for me. It's just like having coffee with somebody for the sake of getting to know them. Not to say it was a difficult task, but it made me a little nervous and anxious just because I hadn't done it before. And now at this point, I've probably had I don't know if I've gotten into the hundreds yet, but it definitely in the high double digits. And it's like something I love doing and just being able to speak with people and get to know them more. And, I think on a personal slash professional level, I've become considerably more, I don't know if extroverted is the right word, but comfortable in, those intimate settings with people than I think I was in the past. And that's because of the work we do here and what we emphasize and our values and what we like to do as professionals. So I think that's been great because it's not really a skill set that I had. It's like, moving back home, that's something I can take with me for the rest of my life, whether it's, something I'm doing on the golf course or just outside of, maybe mediums that I just spend time in anyways, right? Whether it's going to, get coffee or grab lunch or whatever the thing is. And I think that's been really valuable for me because I think that's a great way to connect with people and continue to build and maintain relationships that I never had at my old firm. We were fully virtual.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing just to speak more broadly of the industry for a moment, but virtual firms that are dispersed all over the country or over a large area, focusing on a niche client, like this is the firm for dentists, this is the firm for cardiologists, those sorts of things. Like they're dispersed because they're trying to attract an audience that can be anywhere, right? They're trying to attract a particular profession or particular demographic. And so it doesn't really matter about being local. There's no point to having an office, for example. And I've found so much of the warmth and enjoyment that I get out of being a financial planner comes with being able to spend time with people in the community. Like compare my life as a financial planner now to my life when I was in the army or when I worked at IBM between the army and being a financial planner. And like, I lived in communities, I had a home, I went to restaurants, I did stuff. But I think the depth of relationship that I have with a community like Longmont today is just beyond comparison to the sort of experience that I had in previous careers and in previous fields. And I think that's something that is missed out on when you have a fully virtual experience.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's been interesting. I think there's pros and cons to both, right? But I think definitely an advantage to being in person is the in person aspect. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So, what have some of the challenges or aspects been that were tougher for you during your time here?
well, I think one is kind of something I touched upon earlier, which is just the like at my prior place of business. I don't think I was necessarily rewarded for going a mile deep on certain aspects of clients' lives, and I think early on, like going back almost 2 years now, like I kind of brought the same mentality to work I had in the past, which was like get this done as quick as possible without making any mistakes and then move on to the next thing so that you can continue to, drive new business. And I think it took a little bit of time for me to realize I could probably slow down a little bit and I didn't have to work that way because, you know, we got rewarded, at a company level and on a client level for like doing great work and like that's the north star. It's not bringing in new clients, it's doing really great work for the people that you already work with. I think the other challenge was sort of the imposter syndrome thing, and I think I just kind of brought that to work here from my last firm. But like I said, I think I was able to overcome that in a and hopefully was a short amount of time. I think the other thing that I don't know if it was challenging per se, but it was literally just the in-person aspect. Like I literally had never worked with a client in person for the most part. I really just spent time on Zoom. And when you're on Zoom, you can have notes on your screen. You can, fidget under the table or whatever, and nobody's gonna notice, and that's fine. But in person, there's a certain atmosphere that you can't mimic online that I think you need experience with to do it well. Right? There's just like anybody who's done a meeting in person and on Zoom realizes or recognizes like it's a little bit different. And I think just being able to feel comfortable in that medium probably took me a little bit of time. And then I'd say lastly a challenge for me was, I realized that I was young at the time, younger than I am now at the time. I'd still say I'm young, but like I realized at the time I was young, and because I was young, like if I wanted to do well, I probably needed to punch above my weight in terms of like everything, right? So like professionalism, knowledge, everything, right? Like, and if you wanted to do well, like it's going to be harder for you because you're just so young. And I think because of that, I was we did a lot of cold calling at my last firm, so I used to script everything just so I could know what I was going to say to any objection somebody gave me on the phone. And I think I brought some of that here because I used to be a little scripted in my words, language, and conversations with people without even really actually having a literal script. Like I just kind of brought that habit here as opposed to really just like listening to what the person was telling me and saying and how they were reacting to certain things. And I think that was probably something that took a little bit of time and there was a little bit of a learning curve for me because I don't think I did a great job of that at first. I think I was more concerned with what the person was saying and the smart thing I could say to respond to what they were saying, as opposed to just genuinely listening and being curious as to what they were saying and not really giving much thought to what I was going to say until it was actually my turn to speak. So I think I think that was probably one of the bigger hurdles or challenges that probably took me longer than I'd care to admit to sort of overcome or, feel comfortable with.
Yeah, it's an interesting skill set, and some people don't ever obtain it, which I find fascinating because you think at some point we would all run into the problem, but there is such a difference between waiting for your turn to speak and listening. And so many people default to waiting for their turn to speak and don't take a genuine curiosity. I think the pendulum can swing both ways, but I know personally my pendulum swing has gone so far that I sometimes am distracted from asking more important, meaningful financial planning questions because I'm just so curious. Like when somebody comes to us and is telling us their life story or what's going on in their life or about a problem or a thing going on, and I just want to ask and ask, tell me more about that. I want to hear more about that. Can you share more about that? And I think people do enjoy being heard. I think that's the other side of that coin is people really do enjoy being listened to. But I will admit occasionally I find myself asking more questions of curiosity than questions of purpose.
Yeah, it's weird too. Like this isn't like a I'm better than others statement, but like since I'd like to think I've improved at that skill, like it's weird now. I like go out with friends or people, and I realize like the inverse, right? So like, oh my god, like they didn't listen to a word I just said. Like they're clearly just waiting for their turn to speak, and it's been funny. Like now I'd like to think I'm on the other side of that line of listens doesn't listen. I look back at the other end of the other side of the line and I see all the people over there that I'm like, holy crap, like I probably was just like that and probably still am more than I'd care to admit, and seeing other people now do it is like really off putting to me. And I'd like to think they'd learn, but yeah, like you said, some people, I mean, I know people that are a little older that probably still do that, and that's okay. But I realize that at 25, my brain is still malleable. So I like to try to build these new skills before I'm too stubborn and old.
Well, and I'll hope that everybody's brain is malleable their whole lives and that nobody gets too set in their ways. But yeah, before I move on here, I'll just say we can say you're better, Daniel. We can just say you're a better person in the general sense, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Thank
uh,
you. Appreciate it.
Well, and on that point of being a better person, what's one piece or two piece, however many you have really, but what's a piece of constructive feedback you have for us as a firm? You are not the person who's worked here the longest ever, but you are today the longest tenured person here other than myself. So what do you think would make this a better place for future team members? What should we do differently or think about differently, or what could we be better at?
Hey, honestly, It's not a cop out answer, but I guess it kind of is. So I apologize. But like I think it's literally just doing what you just did, right? Which is like just genuinely being open to improvement and feedback from the team in order to improve. Um, because like we spoke with somebody the other day, the team's working with in order to improve certain areas and metrics, and they said like, just to be clear, like you guys are asking for the feedback and clearly want it and want to implement it. Like you're already 90% of the way there. The majority of people are not actually open to hearing another's perspective on what they're doing poorly and what they could be improving on, right? Because it doesn't feel good to hear. So a lot of people avoid it, right? Whether it's in their personal life or in a professional setting. So I think in order to like to, I don't have a specific thing like Dan, be nicer to people, or show up earlier, or whatever the thing is. I don't think I have like a specific pointed thing that you or the firm or we collectively could be doing better that comes to mind immediately. That's like a glaring hole. I think it's literally just the never lose never let the ego get too big that you stop asking that question and like wanting the feedback and the criticism of other members on the team, and maybe even sometimes outside perspectives from like consultants or just clients and or people in the community. Because I think like that's really important, especially as a practice here. We want to continue to grow and scale, right? So there just exponentially becomes more opportunity for improvement as there's different members of the team that are now interacting independent of you, which isn't necessarily the case right now because there's only 4 of us. But when there's 8 or 16, like there's a lot more opportunity there. And I think continuing to ask that question and build a culture where that's okay is going to help improve the firm long term.
I think that's valuable. But I definitely could. You know me. I don't like being nice. I like being kind. But I could always be kinder, and I could definitely show up a little earlier. Uh, but no, I do appreciate the more heartfelt piece of that as far as being open to improvement constantly. I think that's a theme that's important, not just for us as a practice, but even in what we do as financial planners. Nobody is ever perfect at this job and at this work, and no financial plan is ever perfect. And I think it's meaningful to just always be open to iterating the next best idea or revisiting the assumptions that led you to where you are. What advice would you give someone who was thinking about joining our team in the future, or maybe not our team specifically, taking a path similar to yours that you've been on for the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, for also, I don't care about when you show up, or those were random things I just mentioned. They had no significance, or uh, they weren't true at all. But whatever.
No, no, no,
So,
no. I'll take it. I'll take it to heart. I'll take it to heart.
yeah, I think a lot of advice. Like there's certain people I speak with that are like 50 or 60 that I know for whatever reason in my life that have been quote unquote successful, and I don't know. Like I sometimes like I've kind of stopped like asking certain people from advice because I don't really think they're giving advice. I think they're just like, dispensing their nostalgia and like what they would have done if they were your age again, which isn't necessarily advice. It's more just like a reflection on them, which is fine. But because of that, I've stopped asking certain people for advice. But if I was to give advice in this medium, um, well, I guess where I was going with that is I was saying that people's biases sort of reflect, in the advice they give, and I know that's gonna happen for me too. So like the advice I give, like take it with a grain of salt because it's based off my life and what's worked for me. But like I say it all the time, and I'll say it again. Like I really don't think in your 20s you should be trying to maximize for compensation. Like the difference between a job that, assuming money is not the end all be all, right? So you don't the extra $2,000 is not going to be the reason you survive. Like let's assume that's not the case. If it is, get a second job, do what you have to do, whatever. But if it's not, like I really don't think the 20s are the place to maximize, for compensation. There's the difference between somebody making $80,000 in a year and making $90,000 in a year. It's $10,000, but it's like really not. Like if the job paying $80,000 teaches you a lot more and exposes you to a lot more challenging and challenges and helps you improve certain skills that maybe you're deficient in, like that's worth way more than the extra $10,000 at the job that maybe doesn't provide you those things. And I don't know, that's not really advice for anybody joining my wealth planners now or in the future. I think that's really I'm kind of using that as more advice for people early in their career to begin with. Like, I really think focusing on the education and skill building in your 20s is just a lot more important than, the incremental gain from a couple dollars here and there. I think it's also a really good time in your life to build relationships, right? So I don't like the term like networking as much. Like I think but it is a really good time in your life to build meaningful and deep relationships with people you like and know. And I think when you're young in your career, you might feel intimidated to do so because most of the people you're going to be talking to are probably naturally older than you in a professional setting because you are literally the youngest you could be at a job that's entry level. But I think a lot of people would do some good by developing really deep relationships with the people they know and continuing, to foster those relationships. And then I think another bias I have is like leaving your hometown. I know that's a bias that I hold because I literally did it. But like I have some friends that kind of have stayed more or less where we've sort of grew up, and no offense, like they're kind of the same person. Like they haven't been put in settings where they have to change or they have to shift their perspective on certain things, or they've had to just rely on themselves because there's literally nobody else to do the thing because they don't know anybody else. And I think it's even on like just a professional or just a personal level, like I think it's a pretty valuable thing to do. And I think it's something the majority of people in their 20s should give some thought to, whether that's at My Wealth Planners in Longmont, Colorado, or somewhere else.
I think it's all good advice, particularly in the broader scope of things. It helps that you can apply it here, but I think it's good for people just to think about in their own career and their own path. So, as you move on to your next chapter, what are you most excited to take with you from your experience here?
That's a good question. I think like overall, you would just say like your skills and expertise, but like I don't love that as an answer. I'd say what I'm most excited to take with me isn't really actually like anything technical that I've learned as a financial planner. I think one, it's kind of just maybe the way I feel internally, which I think is just like the lack of imposter syndrome that I think held me back from a certain level of confidence in myself. Like in being able to move back home and still advise people and not necessarily feel that way, I think is something that'll be really great to take with me. And then I think just like, you know, the how do I say this? I think like the confidence in the unknown and being able to proceed forward when the path ahead is uncertain is something that I'll be able to take with me because like a lot of life is uncertain, right? Like we just talked about having a kid or getting married or whatever the thing is, and like you know you have to kind of sort of do something sometimes to realize like everything will be all right. And like for me, moving across the country was that thing. So like now, right, my girlfriend's eventually gonna become a doctor, and we'll probably end up relocating for a residency, and like that doesn't phase me at all because I've done it and know it'll work out, right? And that could be applied to a ton of other areas in your life, right? Whether it's getting married, having a child, starting a business, whatever the thing is that has a high degree of uncertainty around it. I think I'll be able to take that with me because if you do enough things that are uncertain, you eventually just become a little bit more comfortable floating in that space where you don't know the answer to everything, but know you'll figure it out as you get there. So I think those are two things that are good to take with me. And then I think lastly, like I've said it before, but like the fact that like people don't actually care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think I just like continue to remind myself of that from time to time because like cool, you have the answers to everything and you sound real smart, right? When we ask you the question, but like, do you actually care? Are you actually listening? Like, do you actually want the best for me? And I think that's just something I'll continue to remind myself throughout my career. You can know all the technicals and you should, but at the same time, like it's the ultimate liberal arts profession, right? Like we do a lot of quantitative work, but at the same time, like we spend the majority of our time with people talking about people things, and they want to know how much you care. And I think that's just really important, whether you're doing that here or in New Jersey or wherever else. So
Well, I mean, I'm glad you've been able to learn that here because I think it's a meaningful part of what we do and it's a meaningful part of what makes this work enjoyable. As we look at signing off the podcast here for the last time for you, is there anything that you've learned in the last 2 years that you think is worth our audience learning or knowing about?
I feel like this is probably a lot of good things I said in the podcast, and I think you could probably just scroll to a random minute in the podcast and take whatever I'm saying as that thing, because I think the majority of those things are things I actually have learned here. So I'm not sure if like there's anything in addition to those things that I've already said that I would add, if I'm being honest. Like
Maybe
I
something you
think
just want to say just because you can.
well, I thought this was the point of the podcast where you're just gonna start saying more nice things about me, so I didn't prepare for this part specifically. But, no, I don't know. I think a lot of us don't like uncertainty, right? Kinda going back to what I was saying earlier, but, like, I think for the most part, things are never as bad as we make them out to be. Conversely, they're usually never as good as we make them out to be. Most of the time, we're kinda just floating in the middle. And whether I think you can kind of use that comparison for like finances, right? You want to compare it to the market and how things are going there or whatever. But I don't know. Like, I think in general, right? Like people get really worked up about, oh, I don't like this job anymore, and it sucks. My life's over or whatever the thing is. I'm like, look, it's never really as bad as you're making it out to be. And conversely, like when things are going very, very well, like let's slow down a little bit. Like things are gonna, revert back to the mean, and let's not make any rash decisions. And I don't know if that's something I learned here, or maybe more just internalized here. But I mean, you work with enough folks, you start to see very similar patterns in behavior and desires, and the way they react to certain things. And I think that's probably just good advice that most people could take with them, regardless of if they're having a conversation or thought about their finances or not. Also, I don't think most people. Has nothing to do with the audience, but I think the majority of people aren't actually really good about like communicating things. And I think we could all probably get a little better about like being open and honest with others. That's not saying you should give your boss 10 months notice, and that's the level of communication you should strive for. But I do think the majority of
I think it
people
is. I think you should.
But I do think the majority of people could probably improve a little bit in how they communicate effectively with their peers, their colleagues, their friends, their family, their boss, right? All of those, seriously. And I think we just kind of get a little scared of like confrontation and like being in an uncomfortable situation for a couple seconds. But like, it's kind of like buying a car where like, if you just buy the first car on the lot, you might spend, $20,000 for it. But if you put in the upfront like hour to 2 hours to research the car, it might save you like $4,000, even though it was like more of time intensive and kind of a pain in the butt. Same thing with like communicating, right? Like it might be like an hour or 2 hours of uncomfortableness, but like your relationship with whoever will probably be better for it, as opposed to skipping the conversation entirely and maybe being a little bit more comfortable in the short term, but it probably hurts you a little bit more in the long term.
There you have it. Right. Try to be a better person incrementally every day, communicate better, share more, and see what life brings you.
Sure, yeah. Also, this is the 100th episode we've done?
Yeah, there is technically one other episode that we never aired for integrity issues, but other than that, yeah, this is going to be the 100th published episode, unless the same issues arise as we depart.
Sure. Well, how about it? Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure.
Hey, it's been a pleasure to have you both on the podcast, and I think more importantly, as part of the team and part of our community.
Sure. All right. Well, cheers, Dan. Appreciate it.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.